Welcome to the Real News Network. I'm Paul Jay in Baltimore. Many Egyptians are calling it a military coup. The Egyptian Supreme Court essentially disbanded Parliament just days before the presidential election. Now joining us from Cairo is our Cairo correspondent, Jihan Hifaz. Thanks for joining us, Jihan.
Thanks for having us, Paul.
So what's going on?
Yes, as you said, the controversial ruling today shocked many people. In fact, this announcement has been weeks, and a lot of Egyptians have been waiting for this ruling because it could void the elections, and in essence, it would give full authority to the military council. When I say full authority, I mean the Ministry of Interior, the Parliament, the judiciary, and everything else. Now, it's important for our viewers to know that the head judges of this Supreme Court also ruled during the same court on a conviction, on the exclusion law, which was one of the rulings. Say the exclusion law is something that was passed by Parliament, and it said that former members of the former regime cannot serve in the government for 10 years. Now, although this passed, and Omar Suleiman, who's the former spy chief, was disqualified over this, Ahmed Shafiq, who's now one of the top contenders in the runoff election, is still in. So this ruling was to decide if this law, the exclusion law, stands. And not only did they vote in favor of Ahmed Shafiq and saying this law was nil and void, but they also disbanded 1/3 of the parliaments. Now we're seeing it being written as them making the parliament invalid by this ruling, but it's actually only 1/3. The reason now this is all in question is because it makes the rest of the parliament also void, because they can't make decisions collectively without that 1/3 in. Now, the other part of this ruling...
Hang on, Jihan, before you move on to the rest, let's just unpack one piece of this.
Sure.
If I understand correctly, the reason they invalidated the 1/3 is because the Muslim Brotherhood was only supposed to run a certain percentage of candidates, so they got some allies to run as independents, and the court is saying they're not going to accept that.
Exactly. And the problem with this is they claim that it's unconstitutional, but in fact, Egypt has been on a de facto constitution because there hasn't been one written. There hasn't been an assembly that's been put together to create a constitution. So they're saying that because during this transitional period, there wasn't a constitution which gives the guidelines and the regulations for parliamentary elections, who can run under what tickets. They said that they violated this temporary constitution that's in, and therefore they have to disband those members of parliament. And by doing this, it actually it thins out the support that the Islamists have in parliament. So it takes away some of that, as well as a couple of liberals, I believe, were also found disqualified during their campaigning season back in last year, back in November and December of last year, when the elections happened under the military council. Now, the reason we look at these controversial rulings and we say they sound very complicated, if the Supreme Court ruled in favor of disbanding the parliament, then that must be correct. Well, the Supreme Court has time and time again ruled in favor of the military council. They have made a number of decisions that are very favorable to a number of their laws and their policies. Now, here in Egypt, there's been a number of demonstrations and outrage and public discourse with the way the judiciary is set up here in Egypt. And as you saw 2 weeks ago, hundreds of thousands took to the streets all over this country against the justice system that convicted Mubarak and let go of his sons, who are heavily involved in corruption here, and the assistants of the Interior Ministry, who have been proven with lots of evidence that they actually did murder people. So it's because of this miscarriage of justice, and because of the way people are seeing this chessboard play out, they can tell that they can see now with a more identified way, the military council has been playing these elections as a so-called transition to civilian rule, In fact, from my observation, it's seeming that it's transitioning to fascist rule because just last night, very quietly, and it did not make news until the afternoon today, they passed a law that's very similar to the hated emergency law, which was just removed after 31 years of terrorizing Egyptians. Now, the emergency law, which is the one I'm talking about, that was removed to it took away very basic civil rights for Egyptians. Their right to a lawyer, arbitrary detentions were legal, phone wiretapping. A number of incidents were happening under this law that put tens of thousands of people in jail. Now, although a lot of news is coming out about how elements of the emergency law are slowly trickling away from the security apparatus, the military council, through the Ministry of Justice, filed a decree. Now, I say the Council through the Ministry of Justice because these are decisions the Parliament makes. So they knew today that the Parliament, it's what's being talked about on the street now. People are saying the Military Council was aware last night that today the ruling would be to remove Parliament, and because of that, they issued this rule because it wouldn't go through Parliament to begin with, because the next day it wouldn't exist. Now, why is all this important? In 24 hours, Egypt is going to stage the final round of these presidential elections. And now this follows a very violent transitional period. It's supposedly the transition to democracy. But as I just said, they secretly put in a law that gives intelligence officers, military officers, police officers the right to detain any citizen. It's reinitiating the emergency law through a decree that no one knows was passed. We experienced the backlash of that law this morning after it was passed last night, when 3 members of the Real News crew, including myself, were detained by the military police, and the military intelligence. They had taken over a farmland next to the courthouse where we were filming today, where the rulings were announced. And we were walking through and we were filming the irony of this court being behind a slum that also has a huge farmland. All these police officers were stomping on people's produce, and they actually removed them from the farmland. So in us trying to capture this, we were detained. They told us that we would be taken to jail, that we would be tried. They tried to take our cameras away from us. And it took a bickering back and forth. And then they said that we were the one that were destroying the country, that because of foreigners and Canadians, the whole country is being it's sliding into anarchy, when in fact, it's the U.S. government that gives the military $1.3 billion. So, I mean, there's a lot of...
You showed the police your press ID. You're accredited journalist in Cairo. Did that not count for something?
Exactly. We all had accreditation from the MES Bureau, the government's Ministry of Information, where you're accredited, and we have been, and we have good relations with them working here in Cairo. Despite this, no matter who we called or who we tried to talk this out of, they were very, very defiant in that they have authority here and that we are nothing. The passports don't matter, the IDs don't matter. They can detain us on the spot, take our equipment, and will never see us again.
And the point is, this new law actually does give them that authority.
Exactly. And that's what I'm saying here. People on the streets are enraged. And right now there are small demonstrations in Tahrir, but a number of Egyptians are actually planning for a massive demonstration that's supposed to take place on Friday. Organizers and activists say they're preparing for this march. They're organizing in the possibility of violence, but also in the possibility of attacks from so-called unknown thugs.
And Jihan, what happened? How did they finally let you go today?
Actually, this is an amazing story. One of the women who we caught the metro with a number of activists. We were filming them on the way there, just sort of their emotions in this, how they're feeling 2 days before the elections and the revolution in context. And as we're leaving, we meet this older woman who actually the Real News has featured a number of our reports. As we're walking, she sees us getting detained, and she's an older woman. So she sits down, she's like, I'm not leaving. I'm staying here until they're free, until you release them. I'm not going. She's very defiant. She ended up leaving, and she brought back a very prominent lawyer who talked the police officers into releasing us. And so that, I mean, it's amazing the things that people are doing here to help the Egyptians. It's amazing the lengths that they will go to help people that they believe that are on their side.
I have a question for you about the coming elections. If the court found that the law invalidated the law that said that former members of the regime can't run, Then how is this election valid when they already, for example, Suleiman can't run? You would think they'd have to invalidate the entire election and allow some of those people that were not allowed to run to run.
Paul, that's exactly it. What you just said is the most important point here. And that's why people are saying it's the military council. They're in charge of the Supreme Court. They're the ones that are handing down these decisions. And they are the ones in the end that are pushing Ahmed Shafiq. Because if Omar Suleiman was disqualified on the same law in April, why is it that Ahmed Shafiq made it in, although he was not only the prime minister, but the minister of aviation under the Mubarak regime? He for sure qualifies as someone of the former regime who served in the past 10 years, which is part of that exclusion law that the Supreme Court voted against today. So if you can, do you understand what's happening, Paul? As in, I mean, just for our viewers to understand that the military council has time and time again been using political situations, and in all of these political situations involving elections, there has been violence, there has been arbitrary detention, and there have been laws that are supportive of the military council's authority here for the military police and the military intelligence to detain and disperse demonstrations. Now, since the transitional period, they've been doing that. And now, 2 days before the election, people are calling this a soft coup. They're saying that the military council, through the judiciary, has said that the parliamentary elections are void because they don't like who represents parliament, and they don't like the constant bickering that's happening. And they're also saying the Constitution is not written. And because the Constitution is not written, there cannot be a parliament that makes decisions.
Well, Jihan, what are they going to do if the Muslim Brotherhood candidate wins the presidency?
Well, if the Muslim Brotherhood, if Mohammed Morsi, who's the Brotherhood's candidate, wins the election, he will have to work with the military council, because the military council, the military junta here, will be in charge of all parliamentary decisions, the Ministry of Interior, the Ministry of Justice, the Ministry of Information. The military junta becomes the government, if that makes sense. And the presidents will have to work with the military junta. But in the end, they have the final say, even in executive decisions. So tomorrow, what's going to happen is the military council is going to announce who they want to write Egypt's constitution. Why is that controversial? Because in the past year, the military council has a number of violent attacks have been instigated against protesters. Nearly 1,000 people have been killed during their transitional rule, and people say they want immunity. There are reports that indicate the Egyptian military is 40%, has 40% of the Egyptian economy, which means it has investments. There are numerous malls here all over Cairo, holiday areas where they create hotels. The military is heavily invested in the economy. They want to make sure that the Constitution not only grants them immunity, but that says the military is off guards, is off boundaries for the parliament, the judiciary, and the executive branch. And so that's what we're seeing play out here in Egypt. And the reason it's infuriating people is because this is blatantly happening. They're not trying to mask the fact that they're controlling everything. The decision that came from the Supreme Court today is in full support of the military council's policies, not in support of the revolutionaries' policies. And the two candidates who won the first round of election happen to be the most polarizing. So people are now, conspiracy theories are blowing up, but what it all points down to is that this country is very quickly transitioning into exactly where it was 30 years ago, under the hard hand of the military, under a situation where paranoia and fear controlled society, and where poverty and ignorance, illiteracy, sort of created that apathy and created this yes, master, yes, government, we will serve you. So activists are organizing now to ensure that Egyptians mobilize to hit the streets again against this latest decision. And now they're really pushing the boycott campaign, saying the decision that was made today only further shows there must be a boycott of this election. No one should endorse an election that the military council has been running through the Supreme Court, but also through the High Commission's Council. A number of controversial decisions were made by the High Commission Council during this period, which overlooks all the candidates and the electoral process.
Okay.
They have. Sorry, go ahead.
So what we'll do is, I know you're preparing a report about what happened today, which will be running sometime tomorrow morning, and you'll be, I guess, doing another report after the big protest on Friday, and then maybe we'll catch up with you in terms of doing another catch-up interview with you, maybe, perhaps on Monday. So that's good. Thanks very much, Jihan, and we'll be talking to you again soon.
Thank you.
And thank you for joining us on the Real News Network.
Politics.